Restoration and Sustainability of Wildlife Habitat. It's a North Carolina Wildlife Chapter in the 28173 zip code of Union County. We were formed in 2018, and through the involvement of schools and farms and more than 100 homeowners, we were able to achieve sufficient certifications to be recognized as a certified wildlife community habitat by the end of 2019. We keep adding new homeowners and new schools and new farms, so we're really fortunate in that, but we were really excited about that milestone for 2019. If you would like to get involved, you can go to www.ncwf.org, and you can learn how to certify your own yard. And if you like, you can donate to the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. And make sure, if you do that, make sure that you note your local wildlife chapter, and they will get 50% of your donation. So again, we're really glad to have everybody here. This is our first virtual speaker series. We started 2020 back in January and quickly had to put everything on hold. We were supposed to have Dr. Mellichamp here in March, and so you know what happened. So we got him now for September, and that's wonderful. If you have questions or comments throughout the day, throughout the meeting, there's a little box up at the top left-hand corner, right-hand corner, sorry, that looks like a little piece of paper with notes on it. And you can put your comments in there and your questions. And after the presentation, but before the Q&A, Tara and I will read some questions, and Dr. Mellichamp says he will answer them. So that will be lots of fun. And there's your comment box. Tara's going to note some websites and things like that in there. Let me introduce Dr. Mellichamp. He used to live in North Carolina. He's waving if you can see him. He is a retired professor of botany and horticulture and was the director of the botanical gardens at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte for almost 40 years. He's originally a native of North Carolina and did his graduate work in botany at the University of Michigan, and then decided to come back to North Carolina because really, who wouldn't want to do that? He's a world traveler and an expert on plants of all kinds, especially carnivorous plants. And that is a whole topic in and of itself. We could have a whole other speaker series on that. He's written several books, including Bizarre Botanicals, this one that I love very much, Native Plants book, and then this latest one, if you can see that. And this one is the Southeast Native Plant Primer, and we are raffling off 2 of those today, and we'll announce those winners after the presentation, but before the Q&A. Dr. Mellichamp has received several teaching and horticulture awards, and in 2016, he was the recipient of the prestigious Tom Dodd Jr. Plantsman Award of Excellence from the Cullowhee Native Plant Conference. He lives in Charlotte, and he said this, but I have a hard time believing this. He typically kills more plants than not, but he can tell you about that because I don't believe that. But my favorite part of all of this is that his motto, he says, is you learn the most when you make mistakes. And those are definitely words to live by. So with that, I'm going to give this over to Dr. Mellichamp, and he is going to entertain us with native plants.
Well, thank you, Christina. I am so glad to be here, speaking specifically to the Marsh chapter, but other folks as well from across the region. And this is sort of sponsored in the background by the North Carolina Native Plant Society, the Southern Piedmont chapter in Charlotte, and the North Carolina Botanical Gardens, the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens here in Charlotte. And I might just mention whose plant sale begins this coming Saturday for non-members of the gardens. You can log on there and see. So I'm going to be giving you very specific advice tonight on the best of the best plants, talking about going native with plants in your own backyard. Since many of you all might be beginners, I'm trying to cut right to the chase and not minimal background about why grow natives. There are lots of good reasons for growing natives. One, they're heat tolerant. one, they represent our native region. If you wanted to, represent the sense of place, they feed native birds, bees, and butterflies, and those sorts of things. So we'll touch on some of those, but mostly we're going to be talking about plants. Paula Gross and I gave a similar talk a month ago to the Native Plant Society. So she put together the basics of this PowerPoint, and so I've expanded it a little bit. And you can see it. This is based on our new book, Southeast Native Plant Primer. All of these plants are in there. We're going to be touching on 8 categories of plants, 5 selections from each category. Had to narrow things down. So you received a kind of a handout online that outlines these categories and names the plants. So you don't necessarily have to be writing down every plant name here, but you may. But these are the categories we're going to deal with, and we won't spend very much time on each plant. We just don't have time. So I'll be talking the most about the plants that I like the most. And that's just the way it is. You can ask questions about anything later on. So garden starters, pollinator magnets, bird feeders, hummingbird candy, garden carpets, grasses and sedges, made in the shade, and ferns. Category 1, the 5 best garden starter plants. We figure there are a lot of beginners out there who want to try a native. They may be even growing, you may be growing natives already in your yard and just don't know it, because so many natives are in the trade, mainstream in the trade. But I'm going to mention 5. Paula told me pick out your 5 best, and that's hard to do, but that's what we did, and that's what we talked about before. These are plants that could probably grow in sun or shade and do pretty well, but as with always, some plants like more sun, some plants like more shade. So we have flowering dogwood, a dwarf, and I can actually point to these. Flowering dogwood is a small native tree. It normally grows in the shade, but people grow it out in the sun. Dwarf fothergilla has beautiful bottle brush flowers in the spring and outstanding fall color, and usually makes the shrub from 3 to 5 feet tall. Various tall garden phloxes. We've got woodland phloxes, sun-loving phloxes, ground cover phloxes, all kinds of phlox. There's a phlox for every situation. And then there are the cone flowers. A cone flower mostly for sun, but there are some that can grow in the shade. So cone flowers are a great beginner selection. You can't go wrong with them. And Stokes aster, one of our most beautiful southeastern plants. Keep in mind, southeastern plants are adapted to warmer temperatures, and therefore they do better in the south. So unless you're up in the mountains, you're going to be dealing with heat. You need to have plants that are more heat tolerant. So of these 5 plants, the category I wanted to concentrate on for a moment are the cone flowers. The confusing cone flowers. You've got, these things are called yellow cone flowers, orange cone flowers, black-eyed Susans, and other things, but they're all in the genus Rudbeckia. And so one of our favorites that is a shade-loving is the 3-lobed cone flower, also known as the brown-eyed Susan. I misspelled that. It's got a brown, an N there, brown-eyed Susan. These get 3 or 4 feet tall. The flowers are relatively small, about 2 inches. The leaves are lobed, as you can see here. And these can actually grow in some shade. They naturally grow in the woods. But they can grow out in full sun as well. I've had one in bloom 3 months. It's been nicely in bloom. I just started cutting it down yesterday because it was getting tired. I was getting tired of looking at it. And other things were coming along. The more well-known cone flowers, or black-eyed Susans, is the Rudbeckia fulgida, a famous one called goldsturm. You just see these everywhere you look. And it's a big flowered perennial black-eyed Susan that blooms for 6 weeks to 2 months in the summer. Relatively new might be the sweet cone flower shown here. These get about 5 feet tall, very large flowers. They have the largest flowers of our cone flowers. And I love them a lot because they come along a little later and they give you a beautiful show, and they'll even act as cut flowers you can bring inside. There's one in the trade called Harry Eilers, and it looks like this. Don't be careful buying sweet coneflower Harry Eilers unless you really want one whose petals are rolled up like a soda straw. I don't find that quite as showy, but for some reason it grows so well in the trade that it's widely available. The giant coneflower is a knockout for any garden. You see they're 6, 8, maybe even approaching 9 feet tall, shiny green leaves. This one blooms in the spring. Most of the other coneflowers bloom in the summer. This one has beautiful heads of flowers, kind of a grayish cast to the foliage. These like full sun and dry-ish soils. All of the coneflowers want to be a little on the dry side. You don't want to overwater them. You just want to keep them happy. So there's your black-eyed Susans and coneflowers. Coneflowers love butterflies and vice versa. This is the cutleaf coneflower. It's a woodland plant blooming now. Can get up to 8 feet tall, usually shorter, with deeply cut leaves, lots of flowers. And the secret to recognizing it is the flowers in the center of the head are green. So it's sometimes called the green-headed coneflower. Instead of being yellow or red or black, they're green. It's a great coneflower as well. Don't confuse the coneflowers with the coneflowers. So you've got your yellow and your orange coneflowers, not to be confused with the purple coneflower, which is the genus Echinacea. Echinacea blooms in the early part of the summer. Usually it's finished by the 4th of July, and they come in shades of purple and pink, and there are many cultivar selections of these that come in all kind of funny colors, orange and yellow and red and different colors. I like the old-fashioned wild type purple, and so do insects and birds. And so a general note about these various coneflowers is goldfinches will come and eat the seeds, so leave the seed heads up as long as you can until the birds have eaten some of the seeds. Then you can cut them down as they start looking bad. So these are great plants to have in the middle of the summer because they bloom for a long period. And the more sun, the better. That's why I like them. Okay, we move on to the next category, which is the 5 best pollinator magnets. So everybody wants pollinators these days. Milkweeds, of course, are so famous. Rattlesnake master is a strange garden plant whose flowers occur in these knobby heads. Joe Pye weed, one of the, we overuse the word pollinator magnet, but what else can you say? The butterflies just come there and stick on it. And flocks of butterflies. Then there's gay feathers or blazing star, the genus Liatris. They attract bees and butterflies. And here's a clear-winged moth. They're fun to have in the garden. Mountain mint is a plant you probably haven't grown. You might think about it. Don't just go rushing out and buying one. They do spread a bit in the garden, but you want to keep them on the dry side or have them in a meadow. They attract the most unusual insects in the summer, mountain mint. And nothing smells as good as a leaf off of a mountain mint. So when you're showing people around your garden, you want to pick off a leaf and say, here, smell this. And they'll say, that smells good. And then you'll see all these strange insects on there, and that'll be fun to watch. And then finally, blooming late in the season is ironweed, and they're out there blooming now. Now, the rest of these flowers are sort of passing by, but ironweed is in its glory right now. So I chose to speak a little in depth more about the mountain mints. There's several species. They are available, limited in the trade. Beekeepers think they're excellent because they bloom for a long time, and even in drought, and the bees love the nectar from there, and they attract all kinds of interesting insects. There's a hair-streaked butterfly. Oh, and look down, there's a little jumping spider. He's waiting to either jump off on your shirt or catch some insect that comes to those flowers. So it's fun to be out watching these plants because nature comes so abundantly to them. This is the slender mountain mint, a little more reserved, narrow leaves, tighter growing, doesn't spread. I'll be honest with you, the regular mountain mints will spread if they get a little extra water, and you may have to remove some from your garden every year, but they're a joy to have. The ironweeds that bloom late in the year. This is the narrow-leaved Vernonia lettermanii. It's kind of just finished blooming now, and the New York, or the tall ironweed, is just now coming into bloom good, and they come in different heights. So if you haven't grown an ironweed and like the rich pinky purple flower, try some ironweeds. Moving on to the best bird feeder. These are plants that produce seeds and fruits for birds. And so we have here beautyberry with its gaudy purple berries that are ripening now. Dogwood, which has red berries, they're ripening now, and migratory birds are picking them off. They're sort of like a box of candy, it seems to me. The birds land there, they pick the fruit, pick a couple of bites out of it, and drop it on the ground. So you can go out and find these half-eaten dogwood berries all around your dogwood tree. I don't know why they don't, eat the whole thing, but they do disperse these far and wide. You've got birds that are eating the seeds of your coneflowers at this time of year, and your black-eyed Susans. You've got birds that are going to eat the winterberry holly in the wintertime. And over here, this black cherry is representative of trees or larger plants. The black cherry tree is one of the most important trees in the garden, in that it has flowers for insects in the spring and berries for birds in the fall, and is representative of a tree that you might not plant, but you might have. The winterberry holly are the ones perhaps most sought after. This white stuff, I've heard people talking about it. We think it's snow. Most of our collective memories have forgotten what this is. They say it used to come out in the good old days. But these winterberry hollies are beautiful in the wintertime. They withstand the cold very well. And in order to get a show like this, you've got to have male and female hollies in the summertime. They bloom in the late spring. So you've got to have a female holly with its green ovary in order to get the berries. And then you've got to have a male pollinator nearby, as nearby as can be. And the yellow pollen from the stamens is carried by dozens and dozens of little bees all over the plant as they are busily go around getting nectar. So one male pollinator could take care of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 female if you have them in the same vicinity. So you've got to have the right pollinator for the particular holly that you have. So pay close attention when you buy a winterberry holly female. You got to have the pollinator that blooms at the same time, and they'll have names. You can look those up in books, like the present book. But don't forget the trees. This is the time to talk about trees, because trees are so good at making berries for birds. The black cherry we mentioned, the black gum over here is fruiting right now. It has a beautiful fall color. And then there are oaks. You might say oaks are not pretty and that they don't have pretty flowers, they don't have pretty fruits, but they are one of our most important landscape plants, because they're the trees that harbor so many caterpillars that feed baby birds. If you've read Doug Tallamy's book, and if you haven't, you should, Doug Tallamy, Bringing Nature Home, he points out there are over 400 species of caterpillars that feed on the various oaks, and these help feed baby birds. And black cherry is equally good at harboring caterpillars. So don't run out and plant these trees. There are lots of these already in the forest, and they grow too slowly to be shade trees. But you've got to appreciate what the trees do out there for us in the garden, and it has to do with feeding birds at certain times of the year, summer, fall, and winter. And then birds feed their babies caterpillars. So here's a picture taken by Will Stewart. By the way, most of the pictures in our book is by Will. And I may not have attributed every picture here to Will. It's his, but assume that the really good ones are Will's. So here's a bird with a caterpillar. And that's the equivalent of bringing home a really nice sandwich for her babies. They come from trees. Then on the other hand, they're the hummingbirds. Hummingbirds don't eat seeds. They drink nectar. And so the 5 best hummingbird plants would have to be flowers. So here again, for beginners, you can't go wrong with a red buckeye. They bloom early in spring, like late March, early April. They greet the first hummingbirds flying north. Then in midsummer, you've got cardinal flower. I can sit and watch these all day long. The hummingbirds love these. They come and they drink and they drink and they go away and they come back a little later, and the flowers have replenished their nectar. This is one of those flowers that keeps the coffee cup full, in the restaurant. It keeps on serving up nectar. The coral honeysuckle, every yard needs to have one of these on a fence or a trellis or an arbor. These do not climb trees. That's the beauty of coral honeysuckle. They do really well on a fence or an arbor, and stay down at eye level. And you need to get one of the cultivated selections that blooms all summer, like Major Wheeler, Alabama Crimson, and the one we're selling out at UNCC this fall, whose name totally has escaped my brain at the moment. So get one that blooms all summer. The monardas, the bee balms, these get 3-4 feet tall. Hummingbirds love them. Other insects will visit them. It's funny to watch a butterfly try to stick her head down in these flowers. It just doesn't fit. Same with bees. This is a pink bee balm, the Monarda fistulosa types. They're more likely to be bee pollinated. And then I think an all-time favorite, the Indian pink, Spigelia marilandica, with its knockout red and yellow tubular flower. So whenever you see red and yellow here, a little bit of red and yellow here, a lot of red and yellow here, those are usually hummingbird flowers, when they're red and yellow and tubular. So I speak a little more in depth about coral honeysuckle. I've already talked about it. It's a vine. It needs a support. It can grow on a post or a fence, an arbor, and some of them are more vigorous than others. And you can cut them back heavily every year and they'll grow back out. Their flowers are fabulous. And they sometimes will make fruits. And these colorful fruits will last into the fall, even into the winter, and they can be eaten by birds when there's not so many other things to eat. So coral honeysuckle is a great plant. Watch out for other hummingbird plants, vines. They're vines. This is cross vine, very famous, very well known, beautiful plant when it's in bloom. Hummingbirds love it, but it's very coarse, very vigorous, and it will climb up a tree. Don't ever plant vines on trees because they'll just go zoom up to the sky and you'll never see them again. So plant them on arbors, fences, some sort of man-made structure that keeps them down at eye level. And these will only bloom once a year. And then the trumpet vine is even coarser than the cross vine. And if you grow it, it needs to be on a very sturdy post or fence. It will bloom all summer. But it's a little bit troublesome. It sends out underground roots and will creep around your garden and very difficult to get rid of. So I prefer these out on the fences along cow pastures and roadsides, and maybe out on a fence in a meadow where it's not right in your garden. But hummingbirds love these things. These are all fabulous hummingbird plants. There's a close-up of that hummingbird. This is one of Will's great pictures where he stopped the beating of the hummingbird wings long enough to see them. These bloom almost all summer, just from late spring until fall. Then we move on to the best garden carpets. These, of course, would be ground covers. And so the latest technology that tells us the best way to grow plants in the garden, whether native or not, is to plant in layers. And so you need early blooming plants in the lower layer, and then taller plants grow above it and they bloom, and then even taller plants might grow above those. So out in a meadow, you might have some spring flowers, some summer flowers, and some tall fall grasses. And so garden carpets, these I believe are all shade loving, green and gold, one of our super best ground covers in the shade. They don't like full sun. They're semi-evergreen. They'll creep along, cover the ground, beautiful flowers in the spring. You could probably find one of these in bloom any day of the year if they want to pop open, but spring is the heavy blooming time. Then there's Allegheny spurge. It has our most beautiful foliage, in my opinion. Evergreen foliage that's mottled and streaked. Makes an excellent dense ground cover, slowly creeping and enlarging. And there's white flowers in late winter. And then for a really fast growing deciduous ground cover, you may have a place where you need a fast growing deciduous ground cover that drops its leaves in the winter. This would be Canada ginger. And there's its flowers down under the leaves. And these are the big soft fuzzy leaves about the size of the palm of your hand. And these will grow several inches a year, maybe even a foot a year, and quickly cover a bank or a creek bank or a hillside where you don't want to grow anything else. And Canada ginger fits the bill there. And then there's woodland phlox. This blooms in mid-spring, fills the woods with either blue, white, or pink flowers, depending on what variety you get. Very fragrant. Butterflies love them. They don't bloom for a long time, but 2 or 3 weeks. They're a great spring ground cover in the woods. And their leaves are evergreen, so they give you a nice carpet in the wintertime. And then here's the newest plant, if you want to try something new. Generally out in some pretty good sun, at least a half a day of sun. This is the Shale Barrens pussy toes from the Shale Barrens of Western Virginia and West Virginia. And this makes a very short ground cover. In fact, I think I have a picture of it next. Let's see. Nope, next is green and gold. So I think I have a picture of the pussy toes coming up. But here's a little bit bigger view of the green and gold. A great semi-evergreen ground cover. They're different cultivars. Some are bigger, some are smaller, some are clumpier, some are spreadier, some are lusher, some are thinner. Something there for every taste. And the most bizarre of these is the one called Eco Lacquered Spider. And it has runners that come off it that are up to 3 feet long, not kidding, 3 feet long, with glossy foliage. And if you needed to cover an area really quickly, this would cover a bare area in 2 years of growth. And they can take some sun, some shade. The more you water them, the more they grow. You can walk on them, say, once a week, and they will just carpet the ground. That'd be a great plant for a kid to try to tame. You plant this thing in a pot, and it looks like an octopus trying to get out of a pot with its long runners. Here's some other phloxes. This is phlox called Thrift, one of the ground cover phlox. Needs dry, rough soil. Do not plant these in rich soils, or they'll outgrow themselves and die young. They need to be in your roughest area on a bank or a hill, or even out in a lawn where you almost never water it, except during a severe drought. Butterflies love these. Oh, and here's the Shale Barrens pussy toes. It's so new. You probably haven't seen it. We have a big patch of it out at UNCC. The leaves are only an inch tall. It makes little rosettes. They look like they're encrusted with white, and they send up a flowering stalk that's only a few inches tall. but it didn't take it but 2 years to cover this much space. So it does not like to be too wet. So it's got to be well drained. Think of a shale barren, a pile of broken up rock with barely enough moisture to support these things. They do not like to be too wet, but you should try them in a rock garden setting. So now we're in the category of grasses and sedges. And there are many, many of these. And so I've embarrassingly chosen, so few here of all the great grasses. Everyone knows pink muley grass. Best ones I have ever seen of these were growing in the median of a highway with no extra water, hardly any soil, dry, and terrible, like you wouldn't plant anything there. These were just blooming their heads off. It may be because they come from sand dunes down the coast. Then there's the switch grasses. These tend to come from meadows and prairies and damp places. They can get large. I love this red one called Shenandoah. But there's some really big ones that come in a steel blue and green. A lot of cultivars. This is one of the little blue stem grasses that's bluer than average, makes a tight clump. Works really well in a border with black-eyed Susans and other summer blooming plants. Gives a sparkle of color and acts as kind of a space filler. Then for the wooden garden is seersucker sedge. The seersucker is shown as these little wrinkles, I guess you could call them, just like the cloth seersucker on the leaves. These grow fabulous in a moist woodland garden, and they're evergreen. And they mix in well with wildflowers. They don't take over. They make beautiful clumps. Deer will eat them. So you might have to go out and beat the deer off. And a close relative is the blue wood sedge, shown here. That form little clumps, and you plant lots of them, and they grow together and form a kind of a blue carpet that you don't have to mow. And this is a picture of grass flowers. Grasses have flowers just like other plants. You hardly ever see them. Some of them are showy, but not many. This one is Indian grass flowers. Let's see what I've chosen. Here's little blue stem in all of its glory. Here it looks in the summer growing period, and in the fall, or late summer, fall, September, it blooms with these little white plumy flowers. So it's really nice, especially plant them where you can see the sunlight shine through the stems, shine through the flowers. They look really good backlighted. Grasses are your kind of background plants. They give structure to the garden. Leave them in the garden as long as you can. Listen to them rustle in the wind. Cut them down only when they start looking bad as the weather beats them down, and they make great cut flowers, if you will, cut dried flowers for indoor arrangements. Now here's a grass garden for you. When you look at this, this says grass. You got some asters here. In fact, I didn't mention asters, but here's some asters. You should have an aster. This is one of the fall blooming, the fragrant aster called October Skies, or Radon's favorite. These will bloom in October. And then and here are your grasses. Here's some tall Indian grass. This is your panic grass back here, your panicum, your switchgrass. And you could have other shorter grasses, your blue stems and your love grasses and your other kinds of grasses. So grasses for the eye of the beholder. One note about this, we recommend planting grasses in the spring, not in the fall, because grasses like warm weather. So if you planted one now, get it in the ground pretty soon while there's still some warm weather left. It can get established. Don't go out in December planting grasses. They'll just sit there and not be happy. That may be true of a lot of other plants. Try to get them in the ground now. Ooh, pink muley grass. Look at that. That has covered this bank. A difficult place to mow, but the muley grass is green there all summer. And then in the fall, for a month, it turns this purple lavender, and then it turns brown. And you don't have to rush out and mow it too quickly, but you can get around to it eventually. Uh, uh, just a world-class plant, pink muley grass, right here from the Carolinas, out on the dunes, and the edges of pitcher plant bogs, believe it or not. The best plants for shade, made in the shade. Bleeding heart, there it is in bloom. I still have bleeding hearts blooming out in my shady garden because I've watered them all summer when it was dry, and I gave them a little bit of fertilizer. So they're still out there blooming, and the foliage looks great. If you don't water them or fertilize them, they'll just sort of die down and look sort of ratty. But I keep mine a little bit pumped up. Then there's the alum root or heucheras. These are evergreen. Boy, do they come in a lot of different colors. Some of them are not heat tolerant. You have to find the ones that do best for you. We like Dale's strain, D-A-L-E-S, Dale's strain, which sort of looks like the wild type here. And then there's citronelle and pistache. And those are yellowish, and they seem to do well. Beware of some of the fancier ones of these that seem too lush to be true. You got to watch the water on them. Don't overwater them. Don't overwater them. I've had one of these in my yard for 40 years. It's never gotten any extra water. It gets whatever falls from the sky or runs over the roof when the gutters are clogged. Florida anise, a great shrub, evergreen shrub for the shade. Big, bold leaves that look like rhododendron leaves. It can take the heat, take the shade, water it if necessary. They're pretty drought tolerant. They have these beautiful red flowers in the spring. And if you get the cultivar called Halley's Comet, it blooms year round, really. Mine has flowers on it right now outside, almost like in the spring, heavy blooming in the fall. Our native azaleas, you got to have a native azalea somewhere. They can take shade, light shade, half a day of sun. I wouldn't put any out in afternoon sun, but almost any other condition. They come in yellow, pink, red, orange. They're no blue ones, but all the other colors you could probably get. Some are fragrant. One of my favorite plants is the celandine poppy. It comes up early in the spring, blooms early, blooms long, makes interesting seed pods, seeds itself around. You can dig them up, pot them up, give them away, transplant them. They're very versatile and very attractive in the spring. Oh, and here's our friend, another clear wing moth, often called bee moth or hummingbird moth, visiting a bleeding heart. Believe me, the more flowers you have out in your garden, the more insects you're going to have, the more interesting it is. During this pandemic, I've been sitting out in the yard almost every day, and I've learned a lot about insects and birds I didn't know just by sitting out there watching them. Bleeding heart, I've highlighted here. It's got a ferny foliage, beautiful heart-shaped flowers on profuse stems that keep blooming and blooming all summer. Something interesting for kids are seed pods. You can go out there and pick them right now if you've still got some fruiting. But the seed pods have these little protein bodies on there called an elaosome. And when these fall on the ground, they're picked up by ants, and the ants eat the protein body and take the seeds and throw them away. They carry them to their nest and put them in the trash, and that's where the new plants grow from. So they're transported by ants who are after these. So what you have some kid do while they're out of school, which would be more educational than some things they learn in the school, is to put a handful of these out on the sidewalk and sit there and watch them for an hour and see the ants come by and try to pick them up and take them away. The woodland ants are bigger than the sidewalk ants, so you might go out and sit where there's some bigger ants, but it's fun to watch the ants come by and pick these up. Flame azaleas, all kind of azaleas. This is called the Piedmont flame. Like I said, azaleas are large shrubs. They come in many different colors. They're very tolerant of our heat and drought. I'd water them during droughts. You can prune them back if they get too big. They attract butterflies, bees, clearwing moths, hummingbirds in some cases. And you can have some that bloom almost all summer. The plum leaf azalea blooms in the middle of summer, and the swamp azalea blooms in late summer. So most of them bloom in the spring. And then ferns, we've made it to the last category. 5 best ferns. I love ferns. You should plant ferns with your wildflowers. You could start a fernery. A fernery is a collection of ferns, maybe with rocks or logs. Use ferns as a background in your woodland garden. Plant wildflowers around them. Use ferns to replace spring wildflowers that die down. So in your trilliums and your phloxes and your bloodroot and your Virginia bluebells and your shooting stars and so forth that finish blooming in the spring, some of them just disappear. You need something there, so plant some ferns. Remember, ferns come as clumpers or creepers, and you don't want a creeper creeping around in your wildflower garden. It's better to have a clumper. So have an idea of how you want the fern to behave. Ferns always grow by unfurling their leaves in this fiddlehead. So ferns have fiddleheads. So this is a Christmas fern. It's our far and away commonest, most widespread fern. It's evergreen. There's one behind every rock and tree in almost every woods, except the driest. They're really great in the garden. They take to a little extra water. You can divide them after a few years, move them around. I love Christmas fern, evergreen. Dixie wood fern, our largest native fern, up to 5 feet tall. These are woodland plants. They originally come from wet places. This plant originally came from a swamp down near the Darlington Motor Speedway in 1982. I was down there actually looking for it, and we found it there. It's a pretty rare fern in the wild because it's a hybrid. That's what this Dryopteris X australis, or the X means time, means hybrid. So this would be red Dryopteris hybrid australis. Australis means southern. Dryopteris means wood fern. So this is truly a local fern, and it does get big and it grows well, and you need some room for it. So if you want a big fern, there you go. Let's see. Southern maidenhair down here. Delicate fern with little wedge-shaped leaflets, little black stems, irregularly shaped fronds, creeps around among your other plants. So it's a creeper, but it's a delicate creeper. It's sort of sneaks around, comes up here and there. It's quite compatible with other sturdy wildflowers like trilliums and ferns, other ferns. So you can grow it almost anywhere. Its northern counterpart, the northern maidenhair fern, is so great. This is the southern maidenhair. Then there's lady fern, clump former, beautiful color. Usually the stalk of the leaf is red. And then the southern shield fern. That's this. This is a creeper. If you want to cover some space, get a southern shield fern. These are heat tolerant, sun tolerant, drought tolerant, wet tolerant, and they creep. They'll come around. They'll pop themselves up here and there in the garden. This is the underside of a fern leaflet, just to let you know that ferns reproduce by spores. So all these little things under here make spores, and spores blow around, and they might come up on the north side of your house like they do mine. I have a little fern nursery with self-sown fern spores. Here's your maidenhair fern, southern maidenhair fern. Here it is next to a glade fern to show the different delicacy. And then here's your northern maidenhair fern, similar little leaflets on with black leaf. These are not stems. These are the leaf rachises that hold the leaflets. And what the symmetry of northern maidenhair makes it unique, and the delicacy of southern maidenhair makes it unique. Southern maidenhair is not cold. It will not grow up in the mountains. It's too cold. Zone 7 is about its limit. It's perfectly happy here in in Charlotte. Just water it during droughts. Here's your Dixie wood fern, big tall fern. Now our other ferns that are big, we do have royal fern and cinnamon fern, and they get large too. So this is not the only 5-foot fern, but it is certainly one of our 3 or 4 largest southern ferns. Got to have room for it. Do not plant it in the middle of a patch of wildflowers. Okay, so that's all of the plant pictures, and I'll take a minute to just go over these, some of our tips, and then we can have questions. Out of all the tips I can give you, you're lucky I'm only giving you 5. I have a list here. It's called Dr. M's Nifty 50. And someday you may want to know all those, but not right now. So these are the Jivey 5 tips. Morning sun is not the same as afternoon sun. So morning sun is cooler. It's magical. It allows plants to get direct sun without getting too hot. So many plants, even some woodland wildflowers, can take a certain amount of morning sun. So pick your plants carefully, and don't put too many plants in hot afternoon sun. Leave that for hollies and boxwoods and Indian hawthorn and junipers and other tough plants. But do be aware of where your morning sun is and take advantage of it. And you can have morning sun created by the shade from your house could give you morning sun and then afternoon shade, or big trees could give you morning sun and then shade that in the afternoon. Second tip is roots grow out instead of down in our clay soil. So when you dig your holes to plant, don't dig the hole deep. Plant the hole only as deep as the pot is, so you can set the plant on that hard bottom. Don't dig too deep, fill in with soft dirt, or your plant will sink. So dig only as deep as you need to, but dig it wider. Dig it twice as wide, and put your good dirt, well pulverized, chopped up, maybe some compost if needed, and then fill back in. Get down on your hands and knees with that root ball and loosen those roots and knead those roots and incorporate the new soil with the roots. And so make sure the new soil and the root ball is incorporated before you water. The roots are so important that they get into your new soil. And then here's the rule of ones. Water one new plant for at least 1 minute once a week, unless it rains 1 inch. And so the biggest problem I see with people planting plants when they come back and tell me, my such and such didn't live. I say, well, it should have. And I ask them, well, you planted it in the spring. How often did you water it? Just once when I planted it. Well, that's not enough. You've got to go back and check your newly planted plants once a week, at least, regularly, to make sure that that new root ball that you've planted properly gets a good soaking of water. No more often than once a week. You don't want to overdo it, but watering that first year is critical. And then the second year you can slack off a little bit because you will have gotten it established. So 1 minute once a week, unless it rains 1 inch. Now you don't water for a minute if you're using a fire hose. Be kind of reasonable. If you planted a 1 gallon plant, you want to give it 1 gallon of water. I happen to use a hose that doesn't spew the water out terribly fast. I can use it to water gently. Then multiples of 3, plant perennials or wildflowers in groups of 3 for visual effect, and also to encourage cross-pollination. If you want to multiply your plants, if you're using plants that are not cultivars, then you want to have 2 or 3 of each plant so they can cross-pollinate. There's nothing wrong with cultivars. They are merely a selection of a wild plant. There are some complex hybrids. I'm not talking about those, but simple selections of wild plants are almost as good as the wild plant, particularly if they solve a certain problem. Like they're perennials that are more mildew resistant than others, like the phlox agena. The only way it differs from regular phlox is that it's was found in the wild and it didn't have any mildew on it. So it's that's the only thing that makes it different from its regular phloxes. Look at isn't that beautiful? Look at all those clumps of coneflowers and monardas and coneflowers and black-eyed Susan. Last, gardening is an experiment. It always works. Whatever you do, it's going to work. If you might say my experiment failed, but no, if you didn't water your plant, the experiment still failed. Not watering a plant leads to death. Your experiment just might turn out the way you wanted it to. So you've got to pay attention to that. So cultivate an attitude of curiosity and garden for connection, not perfection. Try different things. Love what you do, live with it, understand from it, enjoy the connection with nature. Try different things. That's my advice. Try something this year you've never grown before. Put it in the right place, right plant, right hole, right amount of light, right amount of water, and then keep your eye on it and it'll perform for you. Let's see what's next here. Thank you and keep on growing.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome advice. And we have lots of questions.
Good. So maybe we'll leave this up on the screen, or do you want to see me instead of this?
Let's look at you if you want. So you can answer.
There I am.
I'm gonna tell you who the two winners are.
Okay.
And it's Dora Sestito of Waxhaw and Karen Andre of Mount Pleasant, North Carolina. So I will be sending you guys an email and find out how you want to receive your book. And that is wonderful that you two won. So we have questions. Tara, do you want to read a couple questions? We have great questions.
Sure. Okay, so we have a first question. Do you cut back the little blue stem, and if so, when? And then I was also wondering on the pink, the muley grass, if we also.
Yeah, after they've done their color thing, which would be definitely after October. So you don't even think about it till towards the end of October. Then if you want to, if you're a neatnik in the garden, and many people are, cut those back practically to the ground. Now they may still have some green bases, so you may not want to cut them all the way to the ground, but you can go ahead and cut them pretty much down. You know, they're dead, and get rid of them, or you can leave them up all winter and see what happens. But it's okay to cut them down, say mid-November.
Thank you. Next question, is blur wood sedge a good substitute for mondo or monkey grass?
Sure, you might need a lot of it, but yeah, those wood sedges definitely will cover the ground. The blue wood sedge is evergreen in most normal winters. The worst thing it might happen is a rabbit might nibble on one. I would start out small and plant a small patch and see if it takes to your site. Not too rich soil, and try it. Keep your eye on them, and they could get say approaching a foot tall if they're happy. They can take some sun. They can take morning sun. So I would definitely try them.
Great. I have some black-eyed Susans that did great this year, but the echinacea next to it really slow growing and seems to be struggling. Are
Yes.
there varieties of echinacea that do better in the Union County area than others?
No. Echinaceas are prairie plants. They don't like our heavy clay soil. They don't like twice the rainfall we've had this year. And so putting them next to plants that do like more rainfall would not be good. So you should put your echinaceas and your other coneflowers too in slightly drier places, very well drained soil. Don't overwater them. Don't over fertilize them. I must say, sometimes we get these plants from nurseries and they've been overwatered and over fertilized to make them grow bigger and faster and fatter before they're sold. And that gets them off to a bad start. We do have a native coneflower that's endangered, and it might actually have grown at one time in Union County. That would be the smooth coneflower, but you really can't have. The reason I even mention that is because there are some really excellent soils in Union County for prairie plants like coneflowers and black-eyed Susans, and if you happen to have some of that kind of prairie type soil, you know, well-drained soil in your yard, then you'd be able to do better with echinacea. But it's the water. It's too much water, and heavy clay soil is what does in the coneflowers.
Thanks. We have someone who has a dry slope area that gets sun. They are looking for a drought-tolerant, low-growing plant. Do you have any recommendations?
Well, full sun, low-growing, evergreen, drought-tolerant, hillside-hugging, low-maintenance, native plant are hard to come by. And so I think of our native junipers, our red cedar juniper, and there's some selections of those that can be had. They're low growing. There's a new viburnum abovatum, is an evergreen viburnum that is somewhat drought tolerant, heat tolerant. You could try that. There are some native St. John's worts that are evergreen. The low growing, they're actually called St. Andrew's cross. Mm-hmm. From time to time, you'll run across those at nurseries. I just probably plant some daylilies. Actually, in the native realm, pink muley grass wouldn't be a bad choice on a hillside. You might have to go in and create little terraces where you could plant the muley grass so it holds water on that slope. But seeing a hillside of pink muley grass, I think, would be a delight. The other grasses, I don't know if I can say they would be as good on a slope like that. Certainly pink muley grass would be worth trying. That's a tough for natives. Slopes, sunny slopes are places where you almost have to look for non-native, but one can try with juniper. Pink muley grass would be two that I would try.
Thanks.
Have you tried rudbeckia in that situation?
Well, rudbeckias are perennials, and therefore they're going to grow up and then die down. I assume you want something evergreen on this hillside.
True. Yeah.
And so the rudbeckia, the black-eyed Susan called goldsturm, does have semi-evergreen leaves, but it's not going to give you much of a show in the winter. Right. Of course, neither will daylilies, so that was not a good suggestion either. But the juniper, so the juniper is about your best choice of evergreenness on a slope, because they'll be there all winter. Even the pink muley grass is going to die down. So unless I can think of something better, which I've been trying to find.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Our native juniper is one of the best things for year-round ground cover on a tough, sunny, dry situation.
Well, we have another ground cover question about growing ground cover under a southern magnolia.
Don't do it. Just let that's where you're supposed to put the dead leaves. It's so shady under there. Now, my neighbor has a southern magnolia, and it's kind of limbed up a little bit, so some light comes under there. And so you might find something that could take that shade. That is very shady under a big leafed evergreen. This, if I had a big a magnolia like that, I might try to grow something as an experiment and see how it might take, like something that would grow in very dense shade, like it had to be low growing, maybe it's hard to think of something. I've never seen anything growing under a full skirted southern magnolia. You'd have to limb them up a little bit. And even if you found something, those big leaves, what are you going to do? You're going to have to haul all the big leaves off so they don't smother the plant. I dare say there's something that would grow under there, and perhaps a fern, because it's not necessarily dry under there. It's just full of those big old leaves. So you might try a creeping fern like southern wood fern, or even Christmas fern might rise above the layer of big leaves that are under a magnolia. That'd be a good challenge for someone to find something to go under. I'll have to think about that.
Well, we've got another question about under a tree.
Sure.
Someone has a 5-year-old pecan tree, and first they want to know, can you plant anything under a pecan tree? I don't think they're like black walnuts.
I would.
But also, can you move that pecan tree, even though it's already 5 years old? And how close can two trees be to each other?
Now, pecan or pecans, as we Southerners call them, pecan trees get wider than tall. They could easily get 50 feet wide. So the branches can go out, and the branches come down and practically touch the ground. So it makes a lot of shade. And the first thing I would do would be to make sure that I like those pecans. I waited for 10 years for our neighbor's pecan tree to mature, and then the pecans were not fit to eat. And so to me, a pecan tree that doesn't have pecans is a waste. It's just wasted space. Pecans are not densely shaded, so you could try some plants under there. You could try ferns. Depends on how much you're going to be walking around under there trying to mow, because the limbs come down so far. So they're real. That's another challenge. You could grow some grasses, low-growing grasses like purple love grass. It's not enough light to grow a pink muley. You're going to have shade-loving things. So some shade-loving, unless your tree is very thin or very young. So it's going to be hard to get a great plant under a pecan. And so that's another challenge for someone to try. I'll have to think about it. I've never seen a situation where it was working. So I have to think about
this next question will not be a challenge at all. Okay. Besides the UNCC plant sale, what are other good sources for native plant purchases?
That's a great question. Winghaven, whose plant sale is coming up at the end of this month, Winghaven Gardens over in Myers Park, usually, almost always, have a pretty good selection of natives and wildflowers and trees and shrubs. So that would certainly be a place to check out. They may have online lists. They have Members Day and non-Members Day. So you should Google Winghaven to find out about their plant sale. Beyond that, I'm not aware of another local plant sale. You would have to go to Chapel Hill, to the North Carolina Botanical Garden, or over in the Duke Gardens area. In the triangle there, they have several plant sales a year, and I can't think of any others close by. Now, all around, within a 2-hour drive, you may find several plant sales. The Spartanburg, the community college down in Spartanburg, where they have an ag program, has a plant sale. The Arboretum in Asheville has a very good plant sale later in the summer. So you could, the University Botanical Gardens in Asheville, so you could Google them and find out what they've got when that's coming up. The Native Plant Society has a big plant sale and auction in June, but that's probably not going to happen I don't know what's going to happen next year. It was canceled this year.
South Carolina has done theirs, though.
Wait, who?
South Carolina Native Plant Society is doing one starting next weekend.
Okay, and where is that? Is that in Rock Hill?
I think it's in Greenville.
Okay, well, you'd have to, check on that. Clemson may be having a plant sale. All over the state could have plant sales. They may be virtual, like UNCC this year is going to be virtual. You have to order online, then just go pick them up. Some other places may have a real plant sale. And so I would Google plant sale and just see what kind of hits you get, or university plant sale and see what kind of hits you get. And
and very local to Union County, specifically Carolina Heritage Nursery. And I'm not sure what her address is, but you can find her on Facebook. That's Lisa
Sure,
Tompkins.
that's Lisa Tompkins, and she sells plants all the time. So she's
all the time. You don't have to wait for
a daily plant sale.
Yeah, exactly.
Lisa has a lot of interesting and unusual wildflowers. She knows more about the plants in Union County than anybody. And she propagates a lot of those. So you could get in touch with her. She used to sell at the Saturday farmers market in Matthews, but I don't know if they're having. See, I just don't know if they're having that, given the pandemic. Whether they've started back up.
Yeah, I think they have.
On the North Carolina Native Plant website, they have a listing of nurseries and things that might be worth checking out. I don't know if they try to keep up with all the plant sales. You just gotta check around. Woodlanders Nursery is an excellent nursery to buy plants. You Google Woodlanders, Inc. INC, Incorporated. They're in Aiken, South Carolina, and they ship, or you can go down there when they have open days. The Plant Delights Nursery over near Raleigh, they have a good many natives. They have their open days, and they ship. So when you start thinking about it, there are all kind of places, both nurseries and once or twice a year plant sales, that could be a source of plants. Cure Nursery over in Pittsboro, they'll sell to the public. They have some nice things. So you got to poke around.
I'm going to do one more question, and then we've got several more, but I'm just going to pick one more. If grasses are planted in the winter, what is the strategy to keep them alive until spring? So if you did it by mistake. If for some reason, I don't know why, if you have to plant them in the winter, take them out of the pot and don't disturb them very much and put them in the ground. I mean, you're basically keeping them in the pot. Okay.
You can't just, if you disturb their roots in the dead of winter, or after November, they're just not going to grow new roots. And so they're going to sit there and have to put up with the cold and the wet without being able to suck up water and be adapted to that site where you put them. They're just going to be sitting in a hole. And so it'd be better to keep them in pots over winter where you can move them inside in, really cold weather and put them out. Treat them like tomatoes. Put them out, May 1st. They don't like cold soil. And so if you can't plant them this month or, the 1st of October, I would wait until, next April for our native grasses, and they might get in big pots. Otherwise, you need well-drained soil. You don't want them to sit wet and cold. Wet and cold is bad.
Okay.
For dormant so any wildflower you buy now that's dormant in the pot, it'd be better to keep it till next spring. Like they're just going to sit there. And we've lost more plants to just sitting in pots over winter, cold and wet, than any other. I'd rather have a plant that wilts because then I know I can go water it.
Right.
Plant that's sitting there and there's nothing, you can't see it. You don't know what's happening down in the soil, is very susceptible to cold and wet damage in the winter. I see a cat there. That's
a cat. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. It's fun. So hope everybody had a good time and goes well, and come out to get involved in the UNCC. If you've not seen natives before, come out there and see the native terrace garden in the Harwood garden. You'll find your way around. It's fabulous display. I should have had a picture of it, but don't. It's a great place to see natives planted in homeowner situations. A rain garden, around a patio, around a deck, on a hill, in a border, in the woods, in formal, informal settings. just lots of interesting things. And then if you were to go to other botanical gardens like Duke or the North Carolina Botanical Garden, you certainly see a lot of natives there and get ideas of what to grow. And so as you travel, watch for those kind of things. It's a great way to learn. You gotta start.
Yeah.
So that's, hopefully this either whetted your appetite or moved you a little further along the line of thinking about great natives. And hope to see everybody in person sooner or later somewhere.
And Terry, you will share the recorded version of this with everybody that was on that registered?
I will. It'll probably be a little bit of time. We're just gonna have to get it ready and set up, but it will get over to everybody. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
So thanks to Tara and Christina for putting this together and for helping me through the not knowing how to do Zooms. I know a lot more now. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
I'm going to just exit from here. Oh, there's Helen. Hey, Helen.